Hi. The recording is live, so let's just get to it. We're going to talk about open source today for a bit. I apologize, my voice is a bit running with the topic of the conference, Fluconf. I've got a bit of a cold because I've got a kid in daycare, so I get every respiratory disease that is possible all the time. I hope my voice holds up, but it should be okay. So for those of you who might not know me, my name is, I need to switch to the right thingy. My name is Tante. I think this screenshot of my Mastodon profile basically says it all. I call myself a socio-technologist, which means I'm very much interested in not just technology, but technology as it affects our societies, the politics around them, our ways of understanding, our ways of making sense of the world. I am formerly a computer scientist by education and trade, and I also studied philosophy. So that kind of gives me like this foot in both sides of the spectrum within engineering and within the humanities. So that's why engineers don't understand me, and people in the humanities sometimes have trouble understanding what I'm about to say. I'm also a Luddite, so that kind of influences this talk, of course. So if we look at the digital aspects of our lives, it's easy to say like they suck. Like digital life is kind of shitty because it's dominated by a few people who we all just saw weeks ago bending the knee to a fascist, and they were all too happy to do it. The narrative that technology was somehow liberal or would support liberal causes was very obviously bullshit. It didn't hold up. But of course, that's not the only thing. Like the politics of things are bad. The people running things are bad. But also technology itself is kind of bad. Like if you look at the quality of the things that you can buy or that you can get to augment yourself or to solve problems in your life, like they are shit these days. And that's not just my gut feeling or whatever. Like there's statistics that show that the baseline quality of many things has just gone down unless you basically don't need to care about money at all. And it's not just that the offerings that you can choose are worse than they used to be. It's also that many devices that you can buy these days, like I needed to buy a new toothbrush recently, and they wanted to sell me one with AI and Bluetooth and some backend services and the cloud and everything. But we all know you buy a thing that has the cloud in the backend, at some point they're just going to shut it down. So you have a working device, but you no longer have a working device because the backend servers no longer work. If you're into video games, you know the problem of video game archival, which no longer works because every game needs like servers to run in the background. And at some point, like the big publishers are just going to shut it down. And often, and also you these days you can't even buy stuff anymore. You're supposed to rent stuff so they can have your money every month instead of getting it once. And finally, you often can't fix stuff. Like you have a broken piece of software, you have a broken piece of hardware, you don't have the ability to fix your things because they're not built for that anymore. Like I recently had a laptop that had basically a very small issue, but because everything is just soldered together and put in glue, you basically have to throw away the whole laptop and have to buy a new one, which really sucks. But of course, we as technologists, we have a solution to the problem, and that is open source. There is like this narrative of open source that many have adopted, and I'm not going to say I didn't. Like I've been running Linux on my machines for like 20 years now. I'm an old man, so I had the time to do that. But the narrative of open source often is like we give people, the general public, so to speak, access to software that they can control and modify. You can download the source code or maybe even a pre-built binary if you use like a Linux distribution or whatever, or even for Windows, often there are pre-built binaries, and you can install that, and now you're free. You're liberated from the yoke of big tech. You can, and this whole thing has kind of a Robin Hood resistance kind of vibe. You know, we're resisting the big corporations, we're taking our freedom back, blah, 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 blah. A lot of the time, like we're resisting the big companies and then it's a bit unclear what we're building, but there is this narration of open source that many people love to feel like. We're going to take a quick detour here just because I don't know how familiar people are with the Luddites. Let's talk about the Luddites for just a little bit so everyone's on the same page. I called myself a Luddite in my introduction, and some people might think that that's a bit weird because I'm also like a computer scientist. I work in like my job is research director for a company that builds technological artifacts. So that sounds weird because many people who are not very deep into the topic will have learned this about the Luddites. The Luddites were afraid of technology and progress. And so the 18th century Luddites, they tried to stop progress, and that's why they burned down the machines and smashed them with hammers and that kind of stuff. But and we all kind of like progress because without progress, we wouldn't have the internet and central heating and vaccines and all those things. Like progress is good, right? It's a net positive for the world. So the Luddites were basically idiots who didn't understand how the world works and how to create a better world. And everyone just basically uses Luddite as an insult these days, like mainstream media. And this is a great example for how history is written by the winners, because that was absolutely not what the Luddites were, or why they acted the way they acted. Yes, Luddites were textile workers in the 18th and 19th century in Great Britain and England, where textile industry was absolutely the critical a critical part of their economy. And yes, groups of textile workers did kill power looms, like the automated sort of looms that no longer needed that many people to operate them. But why? There's a great book by Gavin Mueller. It's from 2021. It's very, very worth reading. It's called Breaking Things at Work. The Luddites were right about why you hate your job, which already banger of a title. But just putting out a quote here, the Luddite opposition to machines was not a simple technophobia. Their revolt was not against the machines themselves, but against the industrial society that threatened their established ways of life, and of which machines were the chief weapon. To say they fought machines makes about as much sense as saying a boxer fights against fists. The Luddites were not technophobes. They fought against the way that technology was used by industrialists to destroy their way of lives, to basically break up labor power, we would have said these days. Mueller actually argues in that book that the Luddites were basically proto-Marxists before the term Marxist even existed. So the Luddites looked at the socio-political context of tech, like, okay, there's this new artifact, it has certain properties, it can do certain things, in this case, maybe automation. And they looked at the context, at the political economy, and who this artifact enables to exert power over whom. And that's what they fought. Because we talked about the new power looms destroying their way of life. Like, what was their way of life? And I'm painting a bit broad strokes here. A, I'm not a historian, and B, we don't have like 5 hours to talk about the different nuances of different lifestyles of textile workers in England, depending on which geography they lived in. But like the way of life that one can maybe summarize as aspects that many of the textile workers to a certain degree had, of course not everyone in the same way, was that they tended to have a high degree of autonomy. That meant often workers worked from home and basically could freely decide when to work and how to do the work. Like the industrialists brought them certain resources and demanded, okay, I'm gonna be back in 2 days and I need this stuff to be turned into cloth or whatever the process is. If the sun is great, the textile worker could lie on in the park all day, hang around near the river, just chill and do the work later. They were not controlled in this micromanaging way. They had autonomy to do work when they needed to do it, when they wanted to do it, and they were the ones in charge to decide how to do the thing. Like if they produced cloth, it's fine. If they did it completely manually, it's fine. If they used tools and helpers, it's fine. It's their choice was about how their work would be done. And also that had big effects to what I call the innovation dividend. Because the textile workers were massively innovative and constantly improved like their processes and tools. They had like maybe a loom, and then they realized, okay, the way it's built, this doesn't work for me, this doesn't work in my house, whatever. So they changed it. They added things, they removed things, they changed things so it would work better for them and the way that they wanted to work. And the benefit of this all went to them. The gains that innovation, the change in the technology would go to them in the form of having to work less, in the form or less hard, like doing less manual labor, or just generating more output and generating more income for the family. Like they had that and they were in control of that and the results that this automation would bring to them. And it was a structure that is very much formed around communities of that sometimes were called guilds, or just communities of practice, we might say today, where the knowledge about how to do certain things, about how to produce cloth from certain resources, or how to use the cloth to produce other products, that was shared within the guild. And the sharing wasn't just a transactional relationship, whatever, but it was also very much a social activity that created bonds. Like you got an apprenticeship, and that person who took you on had a responsibility towards you to make you like a master of the trade, so you could then pass that knowledge on. And there was a big focus on quality. Like one of the main criticisms that the Luddites uttered towards the new automatically created textiles, or semi-automatically created textiles, was that they were just bad. Like they didn't have the quality that the tradespeople would say, this is the baseline, this is how this thing needs to be. They had a certain level of pride in their work, and saw that also as a form of responsibility towards the people who would later maybe wear the clothes that the cloth that they produced were sorted from, were sewed from. So they argued against this because, yeah, this makes everyone's products worse. This sucks. And hey, I described earlier that is kind of the world we're living in. Our products that we can have are worse now. So if we try to condense what the Luddites were actually about and what their protests were about, we can say one major aspect was autonomy. Like with the power loom was in like a factory-ish kind of environment. And the capitalist, or like the industrialist, they were called back then, they decided when work would start, when work would end, and how work would be structured. So the autonomy of deciding how to work and when to work was gone, and that's a big change in how you live. Suddenly you are basically managed and controlled by an external person. And also they realized that no longer would improvements, innovations benefit them in the same way. If they improved the power looms, the industrialist would make more money, but they wouldn't have an easier job. Second was solidarity. Like they formed community that were based on a shared experience, on feeling like, okay, we are the textile workers, we are part of a guild, we're part of the community. And those worked because the Luddite attacks on power looms that happened, they were done collectively, like in groups. And you have to remember, I didn't mention that, when they started attacking the power looms, the King of England passed a new law. Destroying a power loom was punishable by death. And they still did it. And I don't know of any recorded case where one of them was sold out by their pals. Like they stuck together because they knew we can only win this together. As soon as they manage to separate us and to drive us apart, we've lost. And that is something that I think comes very, very strongly from this idea of having trades, having actual community that's not just an internet forum, but lived experience that allows you to really form the social bonds that create trust, so you can actually do that kind of work. They didn't start at zero when the problem emerged. Like they had established practices of working together. They had very much this perspective of looking at tech in a sociological context. Like tech isn't good or bad. In a different world that wasn't run by industrialists or capitalists, the power loom might have been great because the benefits might have gone to everyone and everyone would have had to work less. But they realized that that's not the world they lived in. So that's why they fought against the tech as a representative. We're going to come back to that point, whether tech is good or bad or neutral later, because it's sadly a bit more complicated than that. And I think that one of the most important messages that the Luddites teach us is that it is totally valid to say no, to say, yeah, whatever, this is progress, this is the future, but we're not going to take this, we don't want this, and we don't accept this. Because a lot of the time when people say this is the progress, we have to run with this, the question is always, progress for whom? who is this actually benefiting? Is this making my life better? And the Luddites definitely taught us that if you realize that this isn't benefiting you, you should say no. And saying, to quote Jose Marti, a Cuban resistance fighter, doing is the best way of saying. And they did a lot with hammers, and it worked for a while. So basically the whole narrative of the Luddites is about power, about who wields it and who it is being wielded against. It's not about technology. Technology is just an artifact that can be used to enhance a person's power or give people leverage over other people. So let's now get to open source, because open source, of course, also has values. Like we sometimes say the open source community, but like people using open source often have certain values that they share or subscribe to. And of course, open source is huge. Basically, every human being who has digital devices touches open source at some point in their life, not as a programmer maybe, but they install something that is based on open source, or they use something that is based on open source. Even if it's just Wikipedia, but maybe many people use way more things that depend on open source. So it's not easy to say everyone has the same beliefs, but I try to crystallize a few things that are probably, that many people will probably subscribe to. There's more, but we also just have this one little time slot and not 4 hours to go into the depth of things. So the first value I think that we're gonna go into is the big one, free. Free comes from like the idea of free software that many people will know. Free software was like the thing that Richard Stallman, the term that Richard Stallman came up with when this whole idea of, okay, this is all proprietary and I'm locked into this and I can't fix the thing, this sucks. Free software was kind of the theoretical concept that at some point emerged from this. And freedom, as the image here kind of illustrates in this case, is defined by 4 freedoms that are numbered. And that basically the whole open source infrastructure and ecosystem is built on this kind of ideology. And the 4 freedoms, if you don't have them memorized by heart, I put them up here. Basically, freedom 0, the first one is, to summarize it, you can do whatever the fuck you want. Yeah, you can run the program as you wish for whatever purpose. Anything you want to do with it is fine. You're free to do whatever you want. There was, of course, a reaction to you cannot run the program to deconstruct it or to debug it or to build a replacement or whatever. That was sometimes in the licenses, and Freedom 0 says, no, that's not allowed. You're allowed to do anything. If you have the program, you're allowed to do anything. Freedom 1, like the second one, is you can study the program and change it. Like this kind of leads to open source, meaning, hey, you need to get the source code so you can study the program and understand what's going on. Because without the source code, it's just a game of trust me, bro. That's proprietary software, because you can't understand it, you can't work with it, change it, whatever. The third freedom is you can pass the program that someone gave you to others. And the fourth one, kind of related, the things that you changed in the program, you can also pass on to others. And these 4 things, whereas I think that like the second to fourth freedom are basically riffs on the basic freedom 0, they kind of form the whole ideology of open source. That's what everyone kind of gathered around. And that sounds kind of great maybe, and it has brought us great stuff. Like we have free operating systems for the machines we run on that run, like Linux runs everywhere on so many machines. We have so many software stacks that everyone can use and build stuff on, open source programming languages, frameworks, whatever. Like you don't need to start with 0, but you can really start with a lot of stuff in your hand if you want to build something based on this open source infrastructure. But if we look at this kind of freedom that open source is built upon, what kind of freedom is that? What is this? It's libertarianism. It's the idea that you as the individual can do whatever the fuck you want without regard for anyone. You are the only thing that is relevant. Your freedom and your ambitions and your goals are everything that counts. It's the only thing that is really talked about in those kinds of freedoms. That is freedom 1. The freedom 1 is you don't need to care about anyone and don't need to regard anyone else. It's just about you. And while that allows a lot of great and useful stuff, like allows you to take software, change it, adapt it to your needs, share it to others, one thing it does not allow, and that's sharing values. And that's saying my freedom as, for example, an author of a piece of software to say, I want the software to be used for certain purposes, and there are purposes that I don't want the software to be used for. That is explicitly excluded. You may not say, my software is not allowed to be used by the military. It's not allowed to be used in weapons. It's not allowed by big corporations who use it for profit. It's not allowed to create fake and inconsensual depictions of sexual acts of people. Like, that's not allowed in the freedom that the free software and open source community is built on. Like, the understanding of free that shaped this community kind of stops us from talking about our political values. That might be more than just the individual is supposed to do whatever the fuck they want. Like, it kind of pretends like there's the space without power, and if everyone's just allowed to do whatever they want, we create a better society, which is, again, a very libertarian view. But this is, again, the idea that, like, Margaret Thatcher or others proposed, like, there is no society and we don't owe anything to one another. And to be honest, like, this is the bad place. Like, that's not, and I'm not saying the world of proprietary software is the good place. No, it's the worst place. But this is still the bad place, because this kind of understanding does not help us support marginalized groups and maybe uplift them, unless, like, they want to do the whole pulling oneself up by one's bootstraps. Like, it does not help us manifest any form of political values, because it kind of claims that there are none, or that they are not relevant or shouldn't matter at all. And how do we create communities if we can't talk about our values and what we actually care about for the long run? And how do we, like, protect each other if each other is not a consequence, has no consequence in this understanding? If each other is just, yeah, you don't do whatever the fuck you want. But we do have kind of a neat trick, at least we think in open source, we have a neat trick to, like, force the world to work the way we want it, and that's licenses. Licenses are supposed to help us make the world better. And we built a whole zoo of licenses. Like, we have the Creative Commons tree, like, where you can move basically a construction kit of different licenses for your content, where you can say, okay, my writing is supposed to be used in this kind of way, and people get these certain rights. They may reshare it, they may maybe remix it and do whatever they want, with it, as long as they still give me credit, whatever. Like this, there's a lot of that. And there's, like, the code licenses, which are like here this thing summarizes them as, like, permissive, weakly protective, and strongly protective. Like, permissive is, again, like, do whatever you want, and, like, the protective ones go more towards the, okay, you get this, but if you use a GPL licensed kind of code, you also need to release yours under GPL. And this is seen as, like, a very strong protection. Like, nothing can be taken from us. If we as a community create GPL kind of software, it's ours, and no one can ever take it away from us. And that has, again, brought us great things. Like, we have Wikipedia, we have the Linux kernel, and we have GNOME and on top of it, and all those projects that allow us to run software and run our devices without relying on Microsoft or Apple's blessing. But who benefits? To kind of mix things up a little, I introduced a little quiz in the middle of this. What do these three very core things for open source have in common? GitHub, GitHub, where all the source code repositories are, NPM, where all the JavaScript libraries are that you can download, and Visual Studio Code, which is like the open source editor that many people use these days, because it has all the plugins for all the languages, and it's great and whatever. What do these things have in common? They are all owned by Microsoft. If you program JavaScript, Microsoft owns your ass. That's basically it. And all this, that, like, GitHub itself isn't open source, but everything that is open source kind of lives on GitHub. NPM has all the open source in the world. NPM itself isn't, from what I know. The client to attach it is kind of open source, but what they run, we don't know. But they also owned by Microsoft, and of course, Visual Studio Code, Microsoft product. So who benefits from the whole licensing thing? Like, licenses obviously have not helped us to limit the power of big tech at all. Like, Microsoft, after they've kind of got over there, we hate open source and we need to kill it, they realized, oh yeah, that's really cool, because I can get a lot of people to do a lot of work without me having to pay them. And that's when Microsoft shifted a lot of stuff towards open source. Like, they now have a lot of their stacks built up on open source work by people who don't get a paycheck from Microsoft, But because it's all under permissive licenses and everyone can do everything, Microsoft also can do everything. And they have a big lever. Like, yeah, we can't force Microsoft to, Microsoft can use the stuff that we can also use. We have the same tools. Yeah, but Microsoft has way more people, way bigger lever, and can push things in a way that might not suit us. Licenses help to keep tools open and accessible to us. That is right. But are we actually benefiting more from this than maybe Amazon does, or than Microsoft does, or than Google does? And there's a third belief in open source that I think is sometimes under-evaluated, and that's like that there's a right solution that we just need to find and engineer. Like, this is the engineering mindset. Describe the problem, and we'll find the right solution, and we're gonna build it, and it's gonna be awesome. We're gonna solve it, and everyone's gonna be happy. And that works out well because we know there's just one Linux distribution. No, it never does, because people are different, have different wants and needs, which leads to us just building abstractions on top of things to, again, keep normalizing and harmonizing things, because we believe that there's one right way to do these kinds of things, one right way that everyone needs to go towards. We'd establish a standard that everyone needs to implement so everything works the same. And that, for an engineer, makes sense. Everything's interoperable, that's cool, but it's also a bit colonialistic, because is there really a perfect solution? Can that even exist, given how different traditions, cultures, laws, needs, and wealth are? And whose solution is the right one? Like the one that rich tech dudes from the West come up with? Because a lot of the time, that's the only people they talk to. Like, this is the solution that's going to be proposed. And that often ignores the needs of maybe marginalized groups, even in the West, or groups that just are not as online, that are not as vocal in these spaces. So I think we kind of, in the open source space, we kind of focus on the means, and we kind of forget that means need to lead to an end, or it's kind of pointless. Licenses are a tool that can do certain things. They codify certain rules, and they're legally enforceable, which is neat, but they are not actually the thing we should care about. We should have bigger visions than everything needs to be MIT licensed or GPL licensed or whatever. We actually shouldn't want licensing. We probably should want other things, and maybe licenses are partial tools that help us in certain ways to get to that. And a lot of the means that we use, like our understanding of our licenses that we use, and maybe even this mental tool of, yeah, we need to standardize and organize everything the same, I don't think that they're really furthering our goals that much. Like, I'm sure we can say, if everyone has the same access to everything, that is kind of fair. But as I said, some people have way more resources. Some people can use that in way more harmful ways than others. And a lot of open source stuff, does that even do anything for us? Like, think about if you're into tech, like there's a lot of open source stuff that is about managing enterprise level infrastructures, Kubernetes, Docker, and that kind of stuff. Is that for us? Who is that? That's for Google. That's for Amazon. They need that. Like, it's put in under the open source umbrella, but it's not for us. It's for someone else and their benefit and the way that they make money. They need it, but we don't. We're going to come back to the whole artifacts are neutral kind of argument. I just wanted to drop this one in here. You know the drill. Artifacts are neutral and the use matters. Guns don't kill people. People kill people. We hear that a lot. And that's not untrue, but it's also not true. Because in a very great essay that I recommend you read, Langdon Winner argues that sometimes there are certain politics are built into something so deeply by the way it was created, by the people that created it, that you can't get them out. Think of like building an open source solution, maybe even GPL licensed, that tracks people all over the internet, whether they want it or not. There's a level of malice built into this. It's not a tool for liberation, regardless of the license, even if it's the most free license in the world. Open source doesn't help us if you build evil things with open source. If Palantir open sources their whole stack, they're still evil. So, and I think that a lot of the problems that come from something like a very niche guy once said, existence determines consciousness. It was by a very avant-garde thinker called Karl Marx. What this terminology means that the way we live, the way our life is structured, influences how we think about the world and the possibilities that we can think about. And if we look at the people who build open source at scale, who build the big important projects, a lot of our existences were well-paid tech people, often working for the big tech companies, maybe even on an open source project, maybe not. And that kind of breaks our brains a little bit. And that even starts in the way that people are taught how to do engineering in university or whatever. So our brains are a bit broken. I realize in my brain as well, like we think that we need to build things the way that $1 billion company would build them. It needs to be very complex, so it can scale up to the whole world. We use Byzantine frameworks and tools because they're the industry standard, and that leads us to getting shit like React, which is basically the link down there. It's very worth watching. It's a fantastic video about React, and I'm not just hating it because it's meta or because it's slow, even both are true, but because like these engineers use these very complex infrastructures and pipelines to build basically websites. Like this should be easier, but these days it's gotten so complicated because that's the right way to do it. That's how Meta would do it. That's how Google would do it. We're breaking our brains and we're kind of locking people out from participating. And I'm not trying to shit on them, but I think they're a good example for this brain war. Let's talk about Mozilla for a second. Like Mozilla is one of the big open source organizations. Like it's the home of the Firefox browser. They also used to have other things that they then kind of no longer wanted to do, like the Thunderbird thing. And Mozilla is important. Like probably they won't have any money soon, but they are still very important because a browser these days is such a core technology, and Firefox is basically the only alternative to Google's Chrome and derivatives. If you don't want to live in Google's backyard, you kind of need to go to Firefox. There are a few niche browsers, but like for most people. But what is Mozilla doing these days? Because like last year they fired all their policy teams, so they no longer want to work on politics. So what is it they're doing? So I looked at the website. Of course, there's Firefox. They're building Firefox and a few other products that not many people use, but okay, like they might have their uses, a VPN service and a bookmarking service and that kind of stuff. But what do they say our work? Of course, there's the foundation that has the money, does some events, puts out some grants and shit. Cool. What's next? Oh yeah, Mozilla AI, which is a whole bunch of Me Too AI stuff. Like it costs a lot of money. They are still hiring there. You can get hired there for a six-figure salary every year to dig around with AI for a while. But does that lead us anywhere? Because it for sure won't get Mozilla any money because OpenAI can't make money off a $200 a month subscription. So, okay, Mozilla AI, probably not that useful. Sounds like a Me Too thing because everyone needs to do AI, so Mozilla needs to do AI. What's Mozilla Ventures? Well, Mozilla Ventures is basically a VC fund. Great, because VC has done so much good for the world. They do AI VC mostly, like trustworthy AI. Great, cool. So is this a meaningful contribution to the open source community or the people that it's supposed to serve? Does this foster our autonomy, our agency, building communities? Okay, what's the next thing they were doing? Oh yeah, Mozilla advertising. Mozilla is now an ad company. Awesome, because advertising has done great for the web. Actually, they bought an ad company that was founded by a bunch of people who worked at Meta, and then Mozilla bought it, and now like half the managing staff of Mozilla is from that ad company, like all the technical vice presidents and whatever. So great, nothing bad about that. So how does advertising serve the mission? Is advertising something we need, we want? Even if their stuff was open source, and some of it might actually be, is that getting us anywhere? So our organizations and thinking structures, I think, failed us a bit. Like they got us to a certain point, but I don't think that they get us any further than we are. And I think we have some space, some way to go still. I want to add a few things of how I think Luddite thinking can help us to transform open source into something better in the long run. And it's not complete finalized solutions that are great. It's just ideas that spark hopefully a bit more conversation. I think we need to learn the power of no. I think we need to learn to say, yeah, just the big guys are doing it, but we don't need to. We don't need, AI is never, it's here, it's never gone away. You need to use AI. We don't need to do that. If we don't want to, if we see something in it, maybe, but if we feel like, why are we doing, we don't need to do any of that. We don't need to build all the features that every big tech stack has. Like, yes, sure, there's Facebook has notifications, so our tool needs notifications. No, it doesn't. Like, do we want that? No, we can say no, even if people might expect it. We can break with people's expectations if we have good reasons for it. And we should give people who use the software we build as much power to say no as possible. Like, make them disable all the gamification shit if you have to put it in for no idea what reason. Allow them to block things, stop things, let them say as much no as they want and as they need. We know that technology is always political, because it has effects on the people and the way that people live, on the things they have access to, the way that they can think. So, for example, building a scraper that does not respect robots.txt is a political statement about which rules and norms you think are meaningful and which are not. And there probably isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, because depending on your politics, maybe breaking certain rules is good and is valid. But I think we need to find ways to make those kinds of beliefs explicit. Like, every tool these days comes with a license.md file or a license.txt file and a readme file, of course. Like, we state which Python version you need to run it or to install the thing on Debian. We give you a formal license of what you're allowed to do, but we never say what we actually want this thing to be used for and by whom, who we want to empower and who we explicitly do not want to empower. And yes, that's maybe not legally binding and in conflict with licenses, blah, blah, blah. I don't give a shit about that license stuff. Like, it can be a strong statement and can be a statement that creates space to talk about those values and norms and how we want the world to be and how we want technology to serve us. It is a space that can allow us to form actual community that is based on sharing how our worlds work and how they might overlap and experiences that we might share. And I think licenses don't do that, but sharing political values can do that. I also think that we need to embrace disorder way more. And as a German, that's weird to say, because as we know, Germans would would never choose chaos, even if the other version is the absolute evil. But we engineers often think too much about standards and rules that homogenize, because it's easy, it's pragmatic, and it allows you to scale. This, if we just build the right protocol, everyone on the planet can use it and they're all interoperable and whatever. But that might mean it kind of works for everyone, but probably it's just going to work for the dominant group, like Western cis men in tech who kind of like it. Like, don't slap your model on the world. Facebook needs to connect to everyone because they want to show them ads, but we don't. We can build things just for smaller communities, and maybe being interoperable with everyone just kind of breaks the things that your community needs. Like, distance yourself from the proper thing is to build a big standard that everyone can adopt. Like, no, maybe you just build a little shitty thing for the 20 people who care about it and just be fine with it and enjoy that. And always think about power and whose power your tool is strengthening. Like, you can build an image generator with AI that can create any image, whatever, and you can release it as open source, which some people have done. But who are you helping and who are you harming? Who is this for? Like, you all are closer to a beggar on the street than to a billionaire, just by, like, everyone's that. Solidarity also means not to make life worse for your fellow workers. And you are all workers, probably, if you listen to this thing. We should not build tools that are ripe for abuse. Building an image generator means that someone is going to use that to create sexual harassment abuse towards people. That's just what's going to happen. Think about these kinds of things. What are the consequences? Even if it's interesting to build, maybe it still shouldn't be built. Maybe you should say, no, I'm not going to do this because it's going to harm people. And I think we should really let go of scale and embrace community, because we often say the open source community, which is basically everyone, as I said, everyone uses open source. That's not how communities work. Communities are small and they share values and they share practices. Like, don't build the Facebook killer, the Twitter killer, whatever. Build for a defined, selected group of people and their needs, people you care about, maybe people who are like you, or people who you know who need help to build the thing that they need. And if you actually care about liberation, give everyone the ability to speak and participate, because that's not what we do today. The communities are run by those with the highest skill, technical skill, and the most free time and resources, which means oftentimes, like, there's very few females, women, especially if they have kids, just because oftentimes they get left with all the care work for the kids. And the lack of diversity in our products is a direct result of us doing this thing. We shouldn't try to rebuild the world and we should try to rebuild like a small thing for a small community. And the world will hopefully follow if we give people like the spaces of autonomy and agency where they can actually work the way they want things to work, or not because the standard says you need to do this, everyone needs to do this. I just want to, I'm slightly over time, so I'm just going to finish this with 2 book recommendations. If you're interested in Luddites, Brian Merchant's Blood in the Machine is really worth reading because he goes into great historical detail. And there's a new book that came out a few weeks ago, The Mechanic and the Luddite, who goes more into like the abstract, what is this mode of Luddite thinking and how it can help to talk about modern technologies. That's my contribution. Thank you so much for coming and listening.
Thanks for the wonderful talk.
Thank you so much. If there's any question left, I still have a few more minutes. Yeah. I'm scrolling through the chat right now, see if there's a question. How do we get this native open web path? I don't know what that, how to answer that. Okay, here's one I can actually maybe say something to. How can communities learn how to think small? Like how do communities in the physical world think small? Like your neighborhood, or like there's a group in my neighborhood, for example, they meet every Tuesday in like a cafe nearby in the evening, and everyone just does their their knitting and their painting, whatever they want to do. Like they just meet and create a space for them. I think that it's not, maybe saying thinking small kind of feels wrong and kind of devaluates the thing. Like focus on the people that share something with you already and try to build social bonds with them that are stronger than just we use the same software, because that's not a very strong bond. But realizing, okay, hey, they have a shared experience with me. Like they know that they don't want to use this tool that everyone uses because blah, blah, blah. So you build something together, you talk about something together, and then maybe get something going. That can be small. For example, maybe an example is useful. I don't use Instagram. Instagram makes me hate myself because everyone's beautiful and everything's perfect, and it just gives me a horrible feeling about myself. If I open Instagram, I think if I scrolled it every day, I start to kill myself at some point. I still have an account because every tattoo artist on the planet is there, so I kind of needed to research, but I don't use it. So okay, if I were a visual person that wants to share pictures, maybe that is something to form around and saying, hey, we are not happy with how Instagram works, and it makes us unhappy, and it makes us feel bad about ourselves. How should this work? What is this thing supposed to do to us? Maybe that's something where it's like, oh, I just want to share a picture with my 5 queer friends, and that's just our little, and it can be just a signal group, but it can also be maybe something bigger that can attach to something. But you don't need to like have this whole we replace Instagram kind of scale. You don't need that. You can build something for you and for the people you care about. I think that would be my answer to that. Mark asks, okay, so what looms should we smash up and how? That's a great question. There's so many. We live in a very target-rich environment. And it also feels very good to say we're going to smash some looms. Like it feels very like we have a lot of we're active again. We're not passive, because I think many people feel very passive these days. Like everything happens to them. In an interview a few days ago, like I said, it's a bit of a dick move to quote oneself, but I'm going to do it right now once. I said technology kind of shifted because these days people have this feeling that technology is done to us and not for us. And I think that this idea of smashing technology feels like getting out of that mode, which is great. But I also think that it gets very hard to smash technologies these days because they are no longer physical. They are beyond your reach a lot of the time. I mean, if you're very well organized, you can you can smash a data center or take off their power supply or whatever, and that can be very useful depending on what's in that data center. But I think that that mode of Luddite thinking or that action, that was a very, it was a mode of self-defense. We need to stop this because it's hurting us. But we shouldn't limit ourselves to just this idea of defending what we have, but also open source, if it's worth anything, should be the platform to build something better for all of us and for each one of us. So maybe in spite of smashing technology being useful at times, and there's for example, for AI scrapers, there's a lot of tools right now that try to poison data into the AI scrapers, so the data they train on is kind of full of bullshit, which is like a way to smash technologies. And this, for example, we're using Big Blue Button here. We're not using Zoom. Like, we're trying to use different technologies to get free from like the yoke of big tech. But a lot of the time, I think a more useful framing is to think about, where do we want to be? What are the values that we have? How should our world, and maybe even just the technology mediated part of the world, how should it work for us? What are we not getting from it? And going that way. Because I think sometimes the joy of action and of smashing things can stop us from thinking where we actually want to be, and that puts us on the defense, because we need to defend this, so we need to smash X, Y, and Z, instead of thinking, okay, we're here, but are we really where we need to be, or do we want more? Should we ask for more? Should we demand more? Okay. How can we get an LNet-like project to fund free open source software that actually matters? Yeah, that's a hard problem. I have no answer to that. It's a very long political movement, because these days, a lot of the time, again, and I have a very German perspective. I'm from Germany, so I see German and some European politics. Like, a lot of the time, yeah, we put some money on some big open source projects, often in intransparent ways, or because they're seen as critical for the whole ecosystem. But I see very little political will to actually build something, to not just say, here's some money for you to keep things running, but that here's some money to actually create something that has social benefit, and that's not just a startup. You can get a lot of money for startups, but you can get money for, this isn't supposed to make money, but we still should have this. So I sadly have no direct answer for that, but I think it's a long political battle to reframe the way that politics looks at the web. The web isn't a mall, and it shouldn't be a mall. Right now it is one, but it shouldn't be a mall. And we need to stop to think about digital technologies always as a thing where we need to create startups. Like, I want fewer startups. I basically want no startups. I just want digital technologies to work for us and our needs as communities and people. How to expand outside of the open source ghettos and be socially relevant outside the mainstream is an unsolved problem. And maybe that's also, again, thinking about scale, thinking about, oh yeah, we just need to have like this magic bullet, this silver bullet now, to make everyone ditch Instagram, make everyone ditch Facebook or whatever. Same company, huh? Interesting. But I think, again, that puts so much on our plate. Like, replacing Instagram with all the social capital that's on there, and all the practices that people have learned, all the install base, that's way too hard. I think right now a better focus is to build something better for the people you can already reach right now. And if that works, maybe it takes off. And I don't mean that, and you have the startup, but like, okay, maybe this can be an example of practices that more people can adopt and can integrate into their lives, that are not as geeky. Because at some point, if you can show people, hey, this is really cool, it does this thing for me, and it's neat, and you don't need to know about protocols and which language it's programmed in. It's just a way to use the digital as a very malleable and a very plastic thing that you can shape around your needs and the needs of your peers. So I focus on getting more people, like maybe maybe your friend group that includes people who are way less techy. Just get them onto something that's not a Facebook group, and try to talk with them what they need and what they want and what they see as a better way of being and what helps them. Can we realistically prevent the military or law enforcement from abusing the things we build? That is a great question that I've put some thought into in the last months. And I think it's hard. It's really, really hard. Of course, you can build licenses that try to work on that, which automatically means that your license no longer is compatible to basically all of open source. It's still compatible to the permissive licenses because they allow you to do everything and you don't need to give anything back, but no one can build upon your work and stay open source. So it kind of is a dead end from this licensing kind of pathway, which is a problem. So I see no short-term solution for that, but my answer would be, for example, if I had like my open source projects are all like basically scripts with delusions of grandeur, like they are not amazing and no one really wants to use them. But if there were, for example, bug reports coming in and people wanting help, like, yeah, I want to deploy this for my organization. Basically, we're the US Army, by the way. I can say, yeah, fuck you. No, I don't care for it. I will not help you. I will not fix your bugs. I'm not going to do anything for you. And I think that whole kind of statement, and we see that statement sometimes not towards maybe the military, but we see that towards AI these days sometimes, where people say, yeah, you're using this for AI, or your project uses AI to, yeah, I don't care for you. I will not do anything for you. And I think that just by making our values more explicit and saying, if you are in the military, I will make your life harder. If I realize you use my tool, I'm going to start building in features to break your process. I'm going to make it harder to put that into your system. I think that is a way, like the doing some sabotage in the code, like saying, oh, you realize that, let's stick with the example. The military wants to use a library you build, and you realize they also use other 3 libraries that they need for the thing that they're trying to do. Put something in your code that detects the other libraries, and if the other libraries are used, the software breaks down and creates unpredictable bugs, like weird shit. Just build a machine that kind of resists certain kinds of uses if you can kind of detect them. But that's the best thing I have. I think most of it needs to come from us building solutions that maybe don't serve well for like these big organizations, corporations, the military, whatever. Build things that are a bit resisty, that just have weird features that break it for them, and we can still work with it. I think that's a path that might work. What's my view on the chances of the Fediverse to actually challenge big tech, social media? I don't think it should, because then we're still in the whole now we need to scale up. Like Mastodon needs to replace X or Blue Sky, whatever the next big corporate thing is. What's the PixelFed needs to replace Instagram. But then we're still in the logic of that. We're still building like these huge platforms where everyone's in the same dynamics, in the same logics, in the same gamified environment where you have followers and likes and retweets and blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. Like maybe we should build something better. And I'm not saying that Mastodon is a failed project. Like I help administer a Mastodon server, and I think it's great. But like using the ability that Mastodon is more like a federated network of services. Yeah, make these servers really different. Like use it not as, yeah, we're building this one big thing for the whole world. No, build a small thing for a community. Like the Mastodon server I'm on is for media artists, and it shapes like the way that the conversation goes. And we're actually talking about doing some weird shit with the platform. Do more weird shit instead of like trying to replace the thing and reproducing all the logics that it has. I think you could build an ActivityPub based Facebook alternative, or an ActivityPub based Instagram alternative. Would an activity pub-based Instagram alternative not make me as sad when I look at it? I'm not sure. I tried, like, there's a tick. I don't use TikTok, but I use like there's an open source TikTok Fediverse based TikTok alternative called Loops, and I also hate it. It doesn't do it. It makes me dumber looking at it. I don't want this. And it's not like the fact that it's not open source or not community. That's not the problem. The logic of the tool itself is the problem. It's one of those tools that are just by their genesis and by the goals of the people building it, it's bad. And maybe we shouldn't replace bad with open source bad. We should get rid of bad and build something that's nice for us. Okay. Any question I didn't answer? And I think I'm also, yeah. I think we should kind of close this down just so there's some space for people to take a leak if they want to see the next thing. I thank you so much for being here and for listening to me ramble on for like an hour. That's more than people should have me in their life probably, but I appreciate it. If you have any other feedback, there's my contact data. If you have anything you really want to go in depth about, talk to me on Mastodon, send me an email. You can easily find me. And if you want to follow up on what I'm working on, it's on my blog. Thank you so much.